Howdy guys! As I'm a relatively new booktuber, I thought that it was probably a worthwhile idea to do a sort of getting to know you kind of video, so I thought I would do a top 10 books that I've read. Some of these I haven't read for a really long time, so when I'm talking about them it might be a little difficult to really be clear about what impressed me about them, but I thought that I'll give it a go because they've stuck with me. If I can still remember them after all these years, they've stuck with me, so I can give an idea about what it is that I remember, what it is that appealed to me about them, and then you get to know a little bit about the kinds of books that I'm into, the kinds of things I read, and why I like books. So let's get started. These are in no particular order, but the first one on my list is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Matheson. I read this book a few years ago now. I'd seen the film, I'm not going to lie. That's probably a large point of why I read it. But it's hugely different to the film, and I loved it for a completely different reason. I don't want to be spoilery on my channel, so I'm not going to talk too much about why, but the end of the book really appealed to me. It was kind of quite twisty, very different to the film, and I just loved the whole idea of the science fiction behind it, so I would definitely recommend it to everyone. It's a short story too, so it's quite short and easy to read, doesn't take too long. Everyone read it. Number 2. Now I'm afraid this is where you all go a bit, oh, it's typical booktuber, I'm afraid, but it is, number 2 on my list is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This is the book that got me back into reading. It was just a few years ago that I read it, and it was the first book that I had read in years and years that I just couldn't stop reading. I read the whole series, obviously, and I did enjoy them all, but this one, The Hunger Games, the first book, it just I couldn't wait to find out what was going to happen, and that hadn't happened to me when I was reading books in such a long time. It got me completely gripped. It is a young adult book. It does appeal to, you know, if you're that kind of person that likes the young adult books. I do, so I loved it, and I recommend it to anyone that likes those kinds of books. Third on the list is Room by Emma Donoghue. Again, read it yonks and yonks ago. What I really liked about it was that it was quite different. It did feel like a girl's book. I know that's a terrible thing to say, but it did feel like a girly book when I read it. It didn't feel particularly deep, but then I liked the whole concept. It's sort of in two halves. The first half you're, I think, gripped by this child tragedy that you want to read about, and then the second half just really opened my eyes to seeing the world in a different way, I suppose. These people that have been trapped in this room, seeing the world in just such a different way, and that I found that really interesting. Book number 4 is Prey by Michael Crichton. Now, I'm a huge Michael Crichton fan. I've read tons of his books, love them all, but this is the one for me that I always go to first when I'm trying to encourage people to read his books. Again, read it billions of years ago. I can barely even remember the story. Maybe I should read it again, but I can remember just the way that it made me feel, the way that I love how Michael Crichton has sort of what feels like real science, but then a great story mixed together, and I felt that Prey did that really well. So if you're into those sort of sciencey books, then you will love it. The next book on my top 10 list is Velocity by Dean Koontz. I feel like I've said this a lot, but I read this book ages ago. It was actually a book that was recommended to me by my brother. My whole family are big readers, and he recommended this book to me. It was the first time, I think, that I'd read that kind of crime drama type book, and I haven't read a lot since, but I really enjoyed it. I think I just find it a bit, when you read lots of them, I find them a bit too samey, and so I don't read them often. But this one, I can still remember now, even though I probably read it 17 years ago, I can still remember that feeling completely gripped and excited and wanting to know what was going to happen. So, cool book, definitely. So next book on the list is Bridget Jones's Diary, which is by Helen Fielding. Again, a girl's book. I don't typically read a lot of girly type books, but this was one I read when I was at university, and I really enjoyed it. I did read it before I saw the film, and it's the first book I've read, I think, that's really made me laugh. I'm not really into reading funny books, but this really did make me laugh, and I liked the way it was written as a diary, made it super easy to read as well. So I just flew through it and couldn't stop laughing. Next up we've got The Shining by Stephen King. Now, I'm a big Stephen King fan. I've read a lot of his books, but this one to me is This one to me is just the tip of the iceberg. It's the only book I've read by him that I just could read again. I don't read books generally more than once, but this I really enjoyed. And it was one of those that I just couldn't put down. Again, it came at that time when I read The Hunger Games and I was just starting to get back into reading, and I could not put it down. Most books I read in bed, but this I actually was carrying around with me everywhere I went. Even if I went to the shopping, I would put it in my bag just in case I had 10 minutes outside a shop when I could read it, and absolutely loved it. Cannot recommend it highly enough. Probably my favourite book ever. So everyone needs to read it. Next up is a set of books. It's the Harry Potter books by J.K. Rowling, which I think everybody, particularly everyone British, has read and loved. I read them while I was at university, so I didn't read them at the sort of typical age that most people do. I think most people read them younger. I read them all in quick succession. I think there was only one that wasn't out when I read them, so I read them all one after the other and completely loved it. I'm a big Harry Potter fan. And I like the kind of books where they're set in schools, talking about those sort of coming of age things. Love them, and it just ticked all the boxes for me. Nice, easy reading, but great reading too. Now I know I've said with nearly every single book so far that I read them ages and ages ago, and here's one that I didn't. I read this one just a couple of months ago. It's Bird Box by, let me check this, Josh Malerman. Sounds like a job, not one surname. I read this very recently. I must admit I found it slow to get into. It's a great book. It's, again, kind of sci-fi and, setting a kind of scenario where I think that people something could kill you if you saw it and nobody knew what it was. And that kind of, the mystery of it was what got me interested. But as it developed, it was the characters that took over and the characters that kept the story going. And it is great book from start to finish. So as I've read this one recently, it's a definitely up-to-date review for you. The last one on the list is another one by Stephen King, I'm afraid, but he does float my boat. It's The Long Walk, which I believe was actually the one that he released under a pseudonym, or what's the word, pretend name, so that people wouldn't know it was him. But The Long Walk, it's a short story again. And I think the idea is, the concept is that these children or young adults go on a walk and then essentially the people who are last are killed off. And it's it's a sort of narrative of somebody taking part, from what I remember. Again, I love the concept. I think if you've got a good concept, I will read a bad story. I will read it badly written. That doesn't matter to me as much as a good concept matters. And I was completely hooked, loved it. And because it's a short story, I've read it more than once, yay! Which doesn't happen often. But yeah, that's The Long Walk by Stephen King. Read it, it'll take you 10 minutes. So that's it, that's my sort of top 10 books. I hope that gives you a feel for the kind of books I read. I do think that I read a variety of books, but when I did the top 10 list, I found that actually it was the same kind of sci-fi theme that was coming out, sci-fi and drama and excitement that comes through in what I read. But hopefully that gives you an idea of the kinds of books I read, the kinds of things I'm going to be reviewing, and hopefully it gives you a kind of an idea about me as well, and hasn't put you off too much, hopefully. I know that I've waffled a lot. This is my first video. I'm struggling with the words, I'm struggling with looking at the camera, I'm struggling with everything, but I just want to get one up there, and I hope that you'll stick around to see the next one. Bye bye!